Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We've got something special for you to commemorate Veterans Day weekend. A trip up to Stowe, Massachusetts to attend the 8th Annual Battle for the Airfield World War II reenactment. It's the first time I've attended something like this, and I brought my recording gear with me so I could speak with some of the reenactors and World War II veterans and bring you their stories. Up first, let me welcome Rob Collings, Executive Director and Chief Pilot of the Collings Foundation, which hosts this event. Rob, welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be on your show.
Rob, I asked you on because I just finished attending an amazing World War II reenactment up in Stowe, Massachusetts called The Battle for the Airfield. It's a piece of living history that gives a whole new meaning to the word museum. Before we get into that, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your family as the benefactor and organizer of the Collings Foundation, which hosts this and other events. After a spectacular career as a successful technology entrepreneur, what sparked your dad's interest in transportation, aviation, and the preservation of World War II artifacts?
Well, both my parents started the Collings Foundation back in 1979 to preserve living history events. They grew up in the Midwest. My father was into hot rods and cars from the beginning, and his passion for cars never diminished in transportation. And that really was the impetus of starting the foundation, was around transportation-related events. As the foundation grew, so did the focus. The focus was moved into World War II as a main area of interest, mostly because of honoring our veterans and wanting to share their legacy with the younger generations. So in the mid-'80s, there were some aircraft acquired, very historically significant airplanes, including a B-24 Liberator and a B-17 Flying Fortress. And these aircraft were decided on to be flying, not to be static sitting in a museum. And the reason was millions of people a year will have the opportunity to see them go on board, even fly on these aircraft, if they are airworthy and brought around the country. The same thing is true with what we do here in the activities and the event you came to this weekend, the Battle for the Airfield. If everything's in motion, it is so much more impactful, especially for the younger generations, than to walk through a museum and just read signs. Folks nowadays want to be engaged. They want to be part of the history. And this is something that it allows them to do. The reenactment allows them to be more interactive with the history. And frankly, it creates much more of a spark, especially with the younger generations. It also is a place for the veterans to come and gather and tell their stories.
Before we get on to the aircraft and the Battle of the Airfield event, take us back and walk us through your vintage car collection. It looks like quite a list.
Well, the car collection is phenomenal, and the focus on it is American vehicles. So when you come here and you tour through the museum, everything you're going to see in the what we refer to as the car barn, is a rather elegant barn, but nonetheless a barn, are all American-made cars from 1901 to 1940. So it's the pre-war era, which is a very exciting time in transportation. You have the dawn of the automobile in the late 1800s. By the turn of the last century, 2/3 of the cars were electric or steam, not gasoline. And then you have automobile manufacturers that are popping up, over 2,500 in the United States alone. And we're right here in Massachusetts. We're kind of in the epicenter of where this occurred. The first automobile in the United States was the Duryea out in Springfield, Massachusetts. And as you go through the collection, you see the Stanley steam car made in Newton, Massachusetts. You see a lot of New England emphasis, including one of the most elegant cars in the collection, a Springfield-built Rolls-Royce. And it was built in Springfield, Massachusetts, at a satellite factory, which Rolls-Royce set up to take care of the U.S. market.
It's hard to remember that New England was much a manufacturing center.
It really is. But the manufacturing excellence of New England goes back to the firearm era. And that was probably the most precise instruments that were made in the late 1800s.
So moving on to the airplanes, besides the B-17 and B-24, what other warcraft have you collected?
Well, the Collings Foundation has over 40 aircraft in total, so there's a lot of airplanes as part of the collection. The emphasis is the B-24 Liberator. It's the last flying B-24 left in the world today and the most produced American aircraft in history. Along with it is its B-17 Flying Fortress, probably the most famous American bomber of World War II. Those together were our heavy bomber fleet. They flew out of England, out of the Pacific, out of Italy, and they took away the enemy's ability to wage war, is what they did. It was a strategic mission, especially in Europe, bombing factories, rail yards, refineries, anything that Hitler needed to fight, we would bomb and try to take away. And if it weren't for those two aircraft and those brave men who flew them, the war would have wound up very differently. And it almost did because the losses were so incredibly high with these aircraft flying virtually unescorted for most of the mission because we did not have a fighter that had the range that could escort them to Berlin and back. And that all changed with the P-51 Mustang. And that really helped turn the tide in the war. So those three aircraft, along with a B-25 Mitchell, made famous by Jimmy Doolittle flying off of the aircraft carrier and bombing Tokyo, form the Wings of Freedom Tour. And those four aircraft travel around the country to about 109 different locations nationwide annually. We've done over 3,100 since we started the tour over 28 years ago. And it's a remarkable opportunity for people to come out, see these airplanes, not only look at them, touch them, smell them, fly in them, meet a veteran who served on them, or a Rosie the Riveter who built them, and the most important, thank them for what they did for us. Because if it weren't for those brave men and women, we wouldn't be the country we are today.
For those just joining us, we're speaking with Rob Collings, Executive Director and Chief Pilot of the Collings Foundation. So, Rob, how did you learn to fly all these vintage airplanes?
Well, I was fortunate to grow up around antique aircraft and learn to fly in a Boeing PT-17 Stearman like the veterans did during World War II, and then an AT-6 Texan, an advanced trainer, and then move into the bombers and fighters. It's been a remarkable opportunity to fly these aircraft, but it's been even more remarkable of the people I've met and had the opportunity to fly with along the way. Gentlemen like Bob Morgan, the original captain of the Memphis Belle,
wow,
a wonderful, amazing individual. Bud Day, a Medal of Honor recipient. You name it. I've just been so blessed with the people who I've had a chance to interact with. And I hope others try to grab that opportunity and meet these heroes while they're still with us. Because they're not really long for this world, unfortunately. If you look at the age of our veterans, of our World War II veterans, they're all in their 90s at this point.
I understand flying is in your family's blood. Your wife is also certified to fly the B-24?
She is. She is the only female type-rated captain in the B-24. She also happens to fly the B-25. So we share a passion for these vintage aircraft.
So when's the next Wings of Freedom tour? How do people find out more about it?
Well, you can come to the Collings Foundation website. cfdn.org is the quickest way to get to it, and it has our tour schedule. But our aircraft are touring 10 months out of the year from January 15th to November 7th. They're on the road somewhere in the country. And if you take a look at the schedule, they'll probably be somewhere in your neck of the woods to come out and visit.
Rob, I was familiar with Civil War reenactments, but until recently I had no idea that World War II reenactments were also a thriving pastime for many people. I was amazed to see 200 or 300 men dressed in vintage American, British, Russian, and German uniforms and equipment assembled for the Battle for the Airfield event in Stowe, Massachusetts. There seemed to be quite a few organized reenactment units across the region that participated. How is all this coordinated?
Well, it's rather remarkable that these units are out there and they're so specialized in what they do. The units come from all over. We have the flak unit coming from upstate New York, some from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia. They all share a passion for this history. Most World War II reenactments are not done for the benefit of the public. They are strictly for the reenactors to engage in this historical reenactment for their own pleasure. And this is one of the rare occurrences where the public can be part of it. Now, one thing that takes away is an element of the realism. because if there was a big, large open field, typically soldiers weren't in it. They would be in the trees. It's not as tactical as it would have been, although there were very large open engagements like this that occurred. But for the benefit of the public, so they understand what's going on, it has to be in the open. Seeing 300 people run through the trees, you wouldn't see them. So we have to make some compromises in order to have the public really understand what is going on.
Rob, it's one thing to look at a tank or a piece of artillery in a museum. It's quite another to see them driving around firing their cannons. I understand that a key part of your museum philosophy is to keep the equipment in working order. Who restores all these machines and keeps them running?
It's imperative that we keep the machines in working order. The analogy that a lot of people often come here with is this is not like going to the museum. This is like night at the museum where everything's coming to life. If you just walk through the stereotypical old-style museum of dusty displays and signs, those are a thing of the past. The younger generation is much more interactive. They expect to interact online, they expect to interact in real life, and they want to see these things in motion. They want to see them alive. They want to go on safari. They don't want to go to a natural history museum. They want the real life experience, and that's what this is. And it engages so much more. The younger generations, especially, they're coming out, they're seeing a tank in motion, they're seeing the cannon firing. That's a rather inspiring event. And it's rather remarkable. These young kids that come back the next year, they get turned on by this, and now all of a sudden their knowledge of history is through the roof.
Where do you find the mechanics and engineers and spare parts to keep these things going?
Well, fortunately, the armor vehicle collection is predominantly from one source, and that was Jacques Littlefield. And Jacques was a very passionate collector. He was very meticulous in everything that he did in the restorations and wanting the vehicles running, but he also had the foresight to stockpile a lot of these parts and to go out and get spare engines and spare tracks and all the pieces that are needed to keep them running. We have an amazing team of mechanics that keep them running. Dick Moran leads that group, but also if you look at the guys who are working on these tanks, they're younger. And that's really important, is that he's taking this knowledge that he has and making sure it's transferred to the next generation and the generation after that. So there will be a group of people that can maintain these vehicles going forward.
It must take a massive investment to support all this. Aside from relying on your family's fortune, what's the business model behind your efforts?
Well, fortunately, we have a lot of wonderful benefactors, donors. Everyone who comes out, who witnesses the Battle for the Airfield, helps support this. The people that come out to the Wings of Freedom Tour are supporting this. The ones that go for the flights support all these activities. Not only the ones that they see, not only the Wings of Freedom Tour, but other restorations that we're conducting to bring the history back to life. Currently, we have several airplanes that have been completed this year with restorations, including a TF-51D and an absolutely amazing historic Mark 9 Spitfire. Next year, we should complete a F-6F Hellcat and a PT-19 trainer, which was an original Tuskegee Airman trainer.
Wow.
We also have a German Focke-Wulf 190 under restoration. So there is so much that's going on with the foundation all over the world right now. It's so exciting with all of these activities we have and all the history that we're bringing back to life.
For those just joining us, we're speaking with Rob Collings, Executive Director and Chief Pilot of the Collings Foundation. Rob, there's a long American tradition of wealthy collectors creating museums to share their collection with future generations. I understand your family's efforts to build an American Heritage Museum on your 90-acre property in Stowe, Massachusetts, has been met with a little local resistance. What's the status of that?
Well, the original museum concept here, you mentioned a collector wanting to transition into a museum, is the Jacques Littlefield collection, where there were over 240 armored vehicles that were gifted to the Collings Foundation in 2013. They made the family, unfortunately Jacques had passed away, the family made that contribution because they wanted to transition from a collection to a museum so the public could be part of it and share in this legacy. The collection was deaccessioned down to a size and a focus which of what was important to U.S. history. So the vehicles are from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Cold War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Not only American vehicles, but British, our allies, Russian, German, and they tell an encompassing story of American heritage. So that is how the American Heritage Museum concept got started. They wanted to make sure it was in a location where the public had access to it. So the location was chosen to be here. They also wanted a location where the property was owned by the foundation. And never would we run into the rent went up or they wanted to turn the property into a shopping mall, as a lot of museums run into. So it had to be at this location. We have purchased additional property here, the foundation has, including an access road from the main street. We have over 100 acres now for this, which complements the existing activities, the existing reenactments, and the automotive activities, as well as the private landing area. So there has been some pushback. Unfortunately, there is this phenomena, and this is going to be nothing new to the listeners, called NIMBYs, which is not in my backyard, and they exist everywhere. So a lot of people say, well, why don't you build this somewhere else? Because there's someone that would complain about anything anywhere. You had the last panda bear in the world you're trying to save. Someone would complain about it. So unfortunately, there had been some pushback, and we wound up in land court, unfortunately, and we're still waiting on a trial date. The town's premise for why we cannot do this is museums are not educational. Therefore, we do not have the protection of this Massachusetts law referred to as the Dover Amendment, which protects nonprofit educational corporations.
Well, some of the planes are pretty noisy. How many days a year are you actually flying in and out of that airstrip?
Yes, our flight activities revolve around 3 weekend events a year, all of which are open to the public. The first of which is on Father's Day weekend, American Elegance, and it showcases an incredible time period from about 1928 to World War II, the elegance of the automobile that was designed in that era, and how the world at large changing through the Depression, through the coming global conflict of World War II, changed the automobile. The next event in July, Race of the Century, really focuses in on a time period of amazing changes in transportation around the turn of the last century, where we have a stagecoach racing against a 1904 Franklin. We showcase electric cars, steam cars, alternative fuels, and this incredible explosion of transportation and how that transformed America. We went from people who lived within a 5-mile radius to the ability to drive 20, 30 miles or across the country. And then we have our World War II reenactment, which we've discussed. So those are our 3 events where we do have flying activities. Otherwise, there's virtually no flying activities going on here because it is done for the purpose of educating the public.
3 weekends a year hardly sounds like Logan Airport.
It hardly sounds like any airport. It's actually very quiet, aside of those few time periods where the aircraft are flying. This last activity we had, the World War II reenactment, we wish we were flying more, but it was raining one of the days, so you never know what happens with the amount of flying activity.
Can you get Airbnb to contact the locals who maybe can rent out their places during those 3 weekends a year and make a few bucks?
You know, I think that's a great idea because there's so many people that come in from all over. The folks that I met, that I was personally interacting with, flying in the T6, they were from Maine, New Jersey, Connecticut. They're coming from all over. So I think there were a lot of people that would like to rent a home right nearby.
If you lose in land court, are you going to have to consider moving the whole operation to a friendlier locale, maybe up in Live Free or Die, New Hampshire?
Well, I'll be honest, there are times when that always looks appealing, but I don't see any chance of losing in land court with the town's premise of museums are not educational. That just strikes me as it's a foolish waste of tax dollars, in my opinion, as someone who pays taxes in this town, a foolish waste of tax dollars to be even pursuing this legally.
So, Rob, what's the long-term plan for the Collings Foundation? I imagine this is something your father and family would like to leave as a lasting legacy.
Absolutely. The foundation has impacted so many people in such a positive way. We wanted to be there for the veterans. The veterans want to come out, and they've been telling their story, and you ask them, why? Why did you wait so long to talk about what you did in World War II? We have so many kids and grandkids that don't know what their dads did during the war. And when they come out and they finally see their airplane, say, oh, yeah, I was a captain on that B-17. And the children will be like, Dad, I knew you were in the war, but you were a pilot?
Wow.
You flew a B-17? And oftentimes when I ask them, why did they wait so long? They said, well, we don't want the history to be lost. And we felt like if we didn't start telling our story, it would be. So we're left with this responsibility to tell their story. That's our legacy going forward, is to share their legacy. And we're very proud to do that, and we will keep doing that into the future of all of our veterans and to share their story, because unfortunately, this history lesson is not told well enough in our schools. Kids do not learn very much about World War II. This is the pivotal event of the last 1,000 years of how it affected our world. And we cannot forget these lessons. There's so many lessons that have to be told and retold so people don't forget them. American Heritage Museum will be doing that, and we'll continue to do that through the other foundation activities.
Well, Rob, it was an amazing experience to attend the Battle for the Airfield with my recording equipment, so we'll be featuring it in the second half of today's show. I'll certainly check out the Wings of Freedom tour. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was Rob Collings, Executive Director and Chief Pilot of the Collings Foundation, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. To make sure you don't miss any of our shows, stop by realclearradio.org and sign up for updates. Today's program was partially underwritten by the generous support of Donors Trust, the donor-advised fund committed to promoting a free society. For more information, visit donorstrust.org. Ahead, we'll have interviews with the reenactors and veterans I spoke with at the Battle for the Airfield World War II reenactment. Stay tuned.